The way you describe yourself is the way that you are and will experience until you change that story. I want to share this wonderful success story of one of my clients who came to me a couple months ago, and we've been working together. And this is somebody that was in therapy for over 10 years, and he was diagnosed with OCD and depression. And as many of you know, I'm a former psychotherapist, so I can relate very much so to these topics, and I really enjoy working with him. And this success story is so wonderful, and I want to share it with all of you with his permission, of course. And I'm not going to give identifying information for him for his privacy. However, I intend that this video is for many of you who maybe have been feeling like you're living with a certain diagnosis that you've been given. And I want to share with you, and this is not to put down mental health therapy or counseling or to stop doing that if that is your desire, but this is for you to empower you, to allow you to give yourself permission to see your label or a diagnosis in a different way. Welcome, my name is Rose, and welcome to The Rosey Life, where we help you free your mind and follow your heart so you live a life that you love. If you're interested in working one-on-one with me, you can go to RoseyLife.com and read all the different options and packages that I have set up for you to work with me, or you can join the Rosey Life course and community if you would like to be a part of a very loving, supportive community. And I show up weekly to answer your questions live there. And it doesn't matter what time zone you are, because I record those videos and you can ask me questions 24 hours of the day, and I do my best to respond there as well. All right, so I love this video, and I was getting ready for this video and I was remembering something that I used to say as a kid. It's like, I know I am, but what are you? I know I am, but what are you? And I was laughing when I was thinking about that, because think about what that is saying. I know I am, and what are you? Or, but what are you? Right? So it's accepting who I am, but what exactly are you accepting? So as I said, as a former psychotherapist, I do not see clients or AKA patients anymore, and so I only am a coach now. But as a former psychotherapist, it was a very simple process, obviously, after going to grad school and learning all the theories and whatnot. But for me, it became a very simple process as to how I worked with clients. And the thing is when you understand the law, whatever you say you are, whatever you identify as, what you are declaring, that is who you are. So it doesn't matter what it is that you're saying you are that person. That is a law of assumption, because you are assuming or declaring or choosing, this is who I am. So whatever you are accepting, either if it's someone from the outside telling you this is who you are, and you're like, oh, well, that explains a lot of things, that's who I am. So then you will live up to that assumption, or you will live up to that label, or you will live up to that diagnosis, not because it's hereditary, not because you something happened to you and then this is who you are and you have to live with it. No, it is because you are assuming and choosing to accept that label. So this client is so amazing, okay? So this is what this client told me. He said, I was told I was OCD and depressed, okay? This is the Rosey Life client that I'm talking about. So he was told he was OCD and depressed. He went and sought help from a therapist because he was overthinking, all right? He was doing a lot of overthinking and had difficulty focusing. And he would just really be upset and sometimes go into a depression. So the thing with OCD is considered, OCD is considered an anxiety disorder, okay? So it's overthinking basically, okay? And the opposite of anxiety, and what I would teach a lot of my then clients as a therapist is when they're anxious, the opposite of it is also can go into depression. That depression and anxiety are like best friends. They like to hang out. So when you're physically, mentally, emotionally tired of overthinking, that you can go to the polar opposite of that is depression. So you go in internally, you just get really down and sad and in this quiet mode where you're unmotivated. It's to balance them each other out. And it's funny because that's the law of polarity, that their opposite ends of the stick exist. And I was teaching that to my clients then as well. So someone who is overthinking, it makes sense when they say that then there's moments that they become depressed, right? That's just the opposite. But here's the thing, he was in therapy for 10 years trying not to be OCD or depressed. So he has been working with different therapists for 10 years, trying not to be OCD or depressed. And he was being taught, to get into his past and figure out ways that he can cope with this depression or OCD, or just really trying to cope with it and trying to learn ways to live with it instead of being free from it, because in therapy, it's a medical diagnosis, basically. So I love this scripture that I pulled up in Proverbs 23:7. It says, "For as he thinketh in himself, so is he." So in other words, as you think of yourself, so is he. But what happens is you're like, well, I didn't choose this diagnosis, Rose. I didn't choose it. I didn't choose to do that. Well, I want to explain to you a little bit about the background as a therapist as to what we're trained in to do, and this is what I did as well for years. So a diagnosis, this is how a diagnosis comes. So if someone comes to see a therapist or a medical professional or whatever, but I'll stick to the therapy because that's what I did, right? So they come in and you say, what are your symptoms, right? So I would ask, what are your symptoms, or what are your presenting problems? What's going on, right? What is it that I can help you with? What seems to be going wrong? We're already out at the gate looking for what's wrong. Not what's right, what's wrong, right? What's the problem? Why are you here? How can I help you? And then I would have a very long questionnaire of history. Anyone else in your family has struggled with this? Anyone else have overthinking or depression? And honestly, you guys, if you guys were to pull up, it's called the Diagnostic Manual 5. At this point, I have it still, but a diagnostic manual for mental health, it has all the different diagnoses, for any mental health diagnosis in there. And when I was a professor teaching this, I would tell my students, I said, don't start labeling yourself with these diagnoses, because you are going to find a little bit of yourself throughout the whole book. And it doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means that we all go through these symptoms for some reason or another with whatever's happening in our life, but it doesn't mean that you're it. Even then, I knew better not to say, oh, I'm screwed, I'm stuck with this. Okay, so you go in to see a therapist and you're like, okay, what are your symptoms? What's your problem? What's going on? What's your history? How can I help you? And based off of your answers, I would diagnose you. I would give you a diagnosis from the diagnostic manual, and based on the symptoms, you just look it up, and after a while, you as a professional, you memorize these diagnoses so you can hear the symptoms, and you already start ruling out it's like one of these two things, and then you give that person diagnosis. And the main reason for giving a diagnosis nowadays, if you're a provider, a therapist, a professional, and you accept insurance companies want you to give a diagnosis. In fact, you have to give the client a diagnosis so that you can bill the insurance and get reimbursed for that. So the diagnosis, first of all, is for that. Secondly, to develop a treatment plan. In other words, this is my plan on how I'm going to work with this client week to week. This is what their symptoms are. These are the modalities or the exercises I'm going to use to help treat this person. And then this is the potential outcome that we're going for. These are the goals that we're going for. And then you develop a treatment plan based off the diagnosis. So it's all on purpose, okay, to give someone a diagnosis. However, Once you give a person diagnosis, and many professionals won't tell their client what they're diagnosed with, but they will start working through them, and the client actually finds out, and you're allowed to ask what you've been diagnosed with. But again, most of the time the diagnosis is for insurance reimbursement. Okay, but what happens when a client is given a diagnosis, right? Now they've labeled themselves with this, okay? I was told I was OCD and depressed. Now that person goes home and they're like, oh, this is what's wrong with me. And then they blame the OCD and the depression for their behavior, for their actions, for their outcome, for their relationships, for what's happening in their life. Now they have something to blame. Okay, taking away that person's power, they have something to blame. It's outside of me. I have no control over it because my history, my mom, my dad, my grandma, whoever had it. Now there's an external cause, something to blame, right? And remember, in the psychology, it's not referencing the I am. It's not in reference to who you really are. This is all in 3D. Okay, so if you're still seeing a therapist, it's okay. If you're wanting to get therapy, that's okay, right? But I want to give you a different perspective of what labels are, so that if you do decide to get counseling or therapy, right, that you don't take the labels or what they're saying as permanent, because nothing is permanent and nothing is factual, nothing is permanent unless you say so. Okay, so now you see how that is given. Now this person for 10 years was seeing a therapist and trying to not be it, not feel it, and get or live with it and cope with it for that long, you guys. And I did have clients as a therapist that would come to see me and they had been in therapy for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on what it is that they were diagnosed with. And they'd come to see me and I would really begin to help them unravel that and release that. And they were were able to be healthy and feel in control again, because I chose to use something called choice theory reality therapy, and you can look it up. That's actually a great book called Choice Theory. It's by Dr. William Glasser, and it is in my list, my Amazon list, if you guys are interested in reading that. But it is psychology based on choice, which I love because it aligns beautifully with the law of assumption that you are in control and you get to choose how you feel, think, and react. But not wanting to get off track. So my session with my client today, he was saying that he had his last session with his therapist last week. He shared with me just after 1 or 2 sessions with me that he instantly started feeling better. He started feeling released from his diagnosis as OCD and depressed, that even though he saw still remnants of that he started identifying that that's not who I am. And he said, working with me just in 1 or 2 sessions, he started feeling better. He started feeling like that's not him. I'm not this identity. That's not who I am. Who I am is perfect. Who I am is whole. And he made a decision on his own last week to stop his therapy sessions. And he said because he's feeling much more calm, much more peaceful, and much more in control of himself, his thoughts, his feelings, and who he is. And you can tell it just by looking at him that he has majorly shifted. And he shared with me his last conversation with his therapist, and he said, I think this is good. He says, I'm good. I don't need to continue doing sessions with you. And the therapist says, she says, well, why? And he says, everything is supposed to be the way that is. In other words, he was sharing is his own story, his new affirmation, that whatever he sees in this world, he's like, it's okay. Everything is perfect. Everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. He has chosen not to fight the 3D, not to fight his feelings, not to fight anything. He's going with the flow. So he's deciding everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be because he knows who he is. And internally, I am. He's declaring, I am. I am. And nothing out here in the 3D, including his thoughts and feelings, has any power anymore. He's going with the flow and declaring that everything is perfect. So, and the therapist responded to that. She says, what was the shift? She's like, I don't understand. What's the shift? And it's interesting that she uses the word shift. isn't it? She says, what's the shift? What's happening? Why are you like this cool, calm guy now? What's the shift? And he again said something like, he said, I just know that everything is working out and everything's the way that it's supposed to be. And she was so mesmerized. She was like, what is happening? And she even started digging, he said. She's like, well, are you depressed? Are you overthinking still? She kept going back to the first session, really trying to dig and identify what a problem, because she's just like, I don't understand. And she says, are you stuck? Are you frozen? Are you still thinking those thoughts about what you came in with? She was really digging around, wanting to know what's up. And he did mention to her that he's working with a coach, which is who I am. And he said, I am working with a coach. And he said, and she's just really taught me to, I'm in control of how I feel. I'm in control of my feelings. I'm in control of my thoughts. And she said, you know, this sounds a lot like Wayne Dyer. And he kind of smiled and he says, yeah, I like him. Sometimes I listen to him too. And he said, but that is the kind of thing that I study. And she says, oh, I like Wayne Dyer too. It was so interesting because he took dominion over that therapy session. He took dominion over that therapy session with that therapist, so much so that he left the therapist jaw dropped, and she began to ask him questions about how he feels good, and also started chit-chatting about Wayne Dyer and that kind of thinking. Wow, just amazing that he's the one that took his power back. He is in power. He no longer identifies as this person who is OCD, depressed, or anything. He knows who he is, and he knows that he's calling the shots in all areas of his life, because he is the all. He is perfect. All of you are perfect. So I just absolutely love this story, and I intend that it inspires many of you to take your power back, to take your freedom of who you really are, the I am. All right, my loves, thank you so much for subscribing to The Rosey Life, and thank you for watching and liking the video, and thank you for sharing my video. I've noticed that a lot of you are sharing my content with others, and I really appreciate that. It helps The Rosey Life grow. So I love you guys so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video, because you're all freaking amazing. Bye.